There was something about this moment that immediately caught the attention of figure skating fans. Two of America's biggest stars, Glenn and Alysa Liu, sharing the ice during an Olympic warm-up, moving through their elements almost side by side, and looking completely comfortable in the same space. At first glance, it might have seemed like just another training session. 6 minutes on the ice, a few jumps, some spins, a little choreography, then back to the locker room. But for anyone who understands what these two skaters have been through, that moment carried much more weight. Because Glenn and Alysa Liu are not simply two talented American skaters who happen to end up on the same Olympic team. They represent two very different journeys that somehow arrived at the same destination. Glenn spent years fighting to establish herself at the highest level, dealing with setbacks, pressure, expectations, and the enormous challenge of becoming the leader of American women's skating. Liu, meanwhile, became a household name at an incredibly young age, stepped away from competitive skating, and then made one of the most unexpected comebacks the sport had seen. And somehow, by the time they reached Milan, both were standing on the same Olympic ice, wearing the same Team USA colors, preparing for the biggest performances of their lives. The warm-up itself was fascinating because of how natural the interaction looked. There was no obvious tension, no sense that two major competitors were trying to intimidate each other. Instead, there was an atmosphere of familiarity and support. That matters because figure skating is one of those sports where competitors can spend months chasing the exact same goal. One mistake can separate a medal from disappointment. One landing can change an entire ranking. And yet, these athletes still have to share practice ice, share Olympic spaces, and sometimes even share emotional moments that fans remember longer than the actual scores. That is exactly what made the relationship between Glenn and Liu so interesting. They were competitors, but they were also teammates. And at the 2026 Milan Cortina Winter Olympics, they became part of what fans and media affectionately called the Blade Angels, alongside Isabeau Levito. Team USA itself highlighted the trio ahead of the games, and NBC later described the American women as being openly supportive of one another. So when viewers saw Glenn and Liu warming up together, it wasn't just two athletes preparing their jumps. It was a snapshot of a friendship that had developed inside one of the most competitive environments in the world. And that raises a much bigger question. Could this be the beginning of something that continues into the next Olympic cycle? Before we jump ahead, it's important to understand why this moment was so significant in the first place. Glenn entered the 2026 Olympic season as a proven force in American skating. She had won 3 consecutive U.S. national titles, including the 2026 championship, where she finished ahead of Liu. Liu placed second at those championships with 291 points, while Glenn won with 255. That alone tells you how close the competition was. Glenn wasn't simply representing the United States. She was entering the Olympics as the reigning U.S. champion. Liu, meanwhile, had already transformed herself into one of the most intriguing comeback stories in modern figure skating. She had returned to competition after stepping away from the sport, and instead of looking like someone simply testing the waters, she quickly returned to the highest levels of international competition. The difference in their journeys made their partnership even more interesting. Glenn had spent years climbing. Liu had stepped away and then climbed again. And now both were standing on Olympic ice together. That is why the warm-up scene almost felt symbolic. When a skater enters a 6-minute Olympic warm-up, there is no room for distraction. Every second matters. The ice is crowded. Skaters are checking jump timing, spacing, edges, spins, and rhythm. Coaches are watching from the boards. Thousands of people are watching from the stands. Millions more are watching from home. Yet Liu and Glenn appeared to be able to exist in that environment without turning every second into a battle. That is a remarkable thing, because there is a difference between being friendly with a competitor away from the rink and genuinely being comfortable sharing the ice with them during the most important competition of your life. And that comfort can come from trust. You trust the other skater to respect your space. You trust them not to interfere with your preparation. You trust that when you need to focus, they understand. And perhaps most importantly, you understand that the person across the ice isn't necessarily your enemy. They're going through the exact same pressure. They're feeling the same nerves. They're chasing the same dream. That perspective became especially important for Glenn during the Olympic competition. Her short program did not go according to plan. She opened strongly, including a huge triple axel, but then made a costly mistake on the triple loop. That mistake pushed her down the standings and left her in a difficult position heading into the free skate. Glenn finished the short program in 13th with 69 points, while Liu placed 3rd with 59. For most athletes, that kind of situation can become overwhelming. Imagine arriving at the Olympics with enormous expectations, knowing that the entire world is watching, and then making one mistake that suddenly changes the story surrounding you. That's where teammates can matter more than people realize. Glenn didn't need another person telling her what went wrong. She needed people who understood. And Liu was one of those people. The story became even more remarkable in the free skate. Instead of allowing the disappointment of the short program to define her, Glenn fought back. She delivered a season-best free skate of 147.52 points. She landed her triple axel and produced the kind of performance that reminded everyone exactly why she had been considered one of America's biggest medal hopes. She did have a hand down on her final triple loop, but the overall performance was powerful enough to earn her the 3rd highest free skate score among the women. And then there was Alysa Liu. Liu entered the free skate in medal position and skated with an almost completely different energy. Calm, free, confident. She had already spoken about wanting to perform for the audience rather than becoming consumed by the numbers on the scoreboard. During her Olympic warm-up, she even noticed her younger siblings in the stands and looked toward them during the preparation. That mindset became one of the defining characteristics of Liu's Olympic performance. Instead of skating like someone terrified of losing, she skated like someone enjoying the fact that she was finally back where she wanted to be. And that is what makes the Glenn-Liu relationship so compelling. Their personalities and competitive journeys are different, but their paths somehow complement each other. Glenn brings intensity. Liu brings freedom. Glenn's skating can feel explosive and fearless. Liu's can feel relaxed, expressive, and playful. But both are incredibly ambitious. Both have experienced pressure. Both know what it means to be judged in fractions of a point. And both understand how quickly public expectations can change. That shared understanding may be more important than anything else. Because when fans look at a warm-up, they see a few minutes. The athletes see years. Every jump represents thousands of repetitions. Every spin represents hours of conditioning. Every competition represents another lesson. And every teammate represents someone who understands the sacrifice without needing it explained. That is why the image of Glenn and Liu warming up together became so much more than a simple skating clip. It captured a generation of American women who were pushing one another forward instead of simply trying to pull one another down. And that brings us to the bigger question. If this is what American women's figure skating looks like now, what could it look like during the next Olympic cycle? The answer could be fascinating, because the 2026 Games did not simply reveal who was capable of winning medals. They revealed the chemistry of a group that could potentially define American skating for years. And Glenn and Liu are right at the center of that story. The most important thing, though, is that their Olympic story did not end with the warm-up. It became even more powerful once the competition was over. And that is where the real meaning of this partnership begins. Because sometimes the most memorable Olympic moments aren't the ones where someone lands the biggest jump. Sometimes they're the moments when one skater looks across the ice and realizes that another skater understands exactly what she's feeling. And Glenn and Alysa Liu may have given fans one of those moments. The Olympic competition was ultimately a golden one for Liu. She won the women's singles gold medal with a total of 226.79 points, becoming the first American woman to win Olympic figure skating gold since Sarah Hughes in 2002. Glenn finished 5th overall after her dramatic comeback in the free skate. But look beyond the medal table for a moment. Liu won gold. Glenn fought her way back. And somewhere between those two stories was a friendship that made the entire experience feel different. That is why fans couldn't stop talking about them. Because rivalry is easy to understand. Friendship between rivals is much more interesting. And if these two continue skating, training, competing, and supporting each other into the next cycle, this could become one of the defining relationships in American figure skating. The question is no longer whether they can compete at the highest level. They already proved that. The question is what happens next. And that's where things get really interesting. The next Olympic cycle is going to bring new challenges, new programs, new scoring trends, new competitors, new teenagers coming through the ranks. Some athletes will retire, others will return, and some unexpected star will probably appear out of nowhere. But Glenn and Liu have already shown something that cannot easily be taught. They know how to survive pressure. They know how to recover from mistakes. And they know how to support each other while still chasing individual greatness. That combination could be extremely powerful. Imagine what another 4 years of experience could do. Imagine Glenn refining the consistency of her programs while continuing to make her triple axel one of her signature weapons. Imagine Liu building on the confidence she displayed in Milan, with even more experience and perhaps even more freedom in her skating. Now imagine them arriving at another major championship together. The crowd knows their history. The commentators know their history. And the fans remember the Olympic warm-up. Suddenly, every shared moment becomes part of a larger story. That is how sporting legacies are created, not from one competition, but from years of moments that eventually become connected. And maybe that is the real reason this simple warm-up clip felt so special. It wasn't necessarily predicting the future. It was showing us what the future could look like if these two athletes continue on the same path. There is no guarantee that either will compete at the next Olympics. There is no guarantee that they will remain teammates. There is no guarantee that injuries, changes in priorities, new talent, or personal decisions won't completely reshape American skating. But that's exactly what makes the possibility so exciting. Sports are unpredictable, and figure skating might be one of the most unpredictable sports of all. One injury can change a career. One new jump can change the technical landscape. One breakthrough performance can change an entire national team. But through all of that uncertainty, the image of two American stars warming up together represents something stable. Respect, friendship, competition without hostility, and the understanding that someone else's success doesn't automatically erase your own. In fact, sometimes someone else's success can push you to become better. That is what makes Glenn and Liu such an interesting pairing. They can challenge one another without destroying one another. They can compete for medals and still celebrate each other's achievements. And at the Olympics, that became impossible to ignore. The NBC coverage even highlighted the emotional connection among the American skaters, describing the athletes at the Milan ice skating arena as more than rivals. Glenn herself had spoken warmly about Liu and Levito, emphasizing how meaningful it was to watch them grow into elite athletes. That's not something you hear every day in elite sport. Usually, the story is about rivalry. Who beat whom? Who made the mistake? Who stole the medal? Who disappointed? But this story has another layer. What if the greatest competition isn't about destroying your opponent? What if it's about becoming better because they are there? That may be exactly what happened with Glenn and Liu. And perhaps that is why fans connected with them so quickly. They weren't just watching two skaters. They were watching two different versions of excellence. Glenn's road was about persistence. Liu's road was about rediscovery. One kept fighting through the sport. The other stepped away and then found her way back. And when they returned to the same Olympic ice, they weren't the same athletes they had been years earlier. They were more mature, more experienced, and perhaps more comfortable with who they were. That is something fans can feel. It doesn't require a scoreboard. It doesn't require a medal. It doesn't even require a perfect skate. Sometimes you can see it in the way athletes interact before the competition begins. And that is exactly what the warm-up captured. A few minutes, two skaters, one Olympic rink, and a relationship that suddenly felt much bigger than the moment itself. Now, when fans look toward the future, they naturally start wondering what comes next. Will Glenn continue? Will Liu continue? Could they both be back at another Olympics? Could the United States once again have multiple women capable of challenging for the podium? Could the Blade Angels become one of the most memorable American skating groups of their era? Those questions are impossible to answer right now, but they are fun to ask, because the future of American women's skating suddenly looks much more interesting. The United States has already shown that it can produce athletes with completely different styles and personalities. And Glenn and Liu represent two of the strongest examples. If they continue pushing each other, the benefits could extend far beyond their individual careers. Young skaters watching them may see something important. They may realize that elite competition doesn't have to mean isolation. They may see that you can be ambitious and supportive. You can want the gold medal and still cheer for the person standing next to you. You can make a mistake and still have someone waiting for you afterward. And you can win without making someone else's loss feel like a personal victory. That message might actually be more important than the medals. Because Olympic sports are ultimately about people. The jumps are spectacular. The spins are beautiful. The scores are fascinating. But what fans remember years later are the stories. The comeback, the friendship, the tears, the celebration, the hug. And Glenn and Liu have already given fans all of those ingredients. So when that warm-up footage appears on screen again, don't just watch the jumps. Watch the body language. Watch how comfortable they seem sharing the ice. Watch how two athletes who are capable of competing fiercely can still coexist with genuine warmth. Because that may be the most important part of the story. The future of American figure skating may not be built around one superstar. It may be built around a group. A group of athletes who push each other. A group that celebrates one another. A group that understands that the sport is bigger than any individual score. And if Glenn and Alysa Liu remain part of that group, the next chapter could be even more exciting than the first. The 2026 Olympics gave us the image. The next few years will tell us what that image ultimately means. Maybe it becomes the beginning of another Olympic journey. Maybe it becomes a beautiful snapshot of two champions sharing one unforgettable chapter. Either way, fans will remember it. Because in the end, the most powerful thing about seeing Glenn and Alysa Liu warm up together wasn't the possibility of another Olympics. It was what the moment represented. Two athletes who had taken very different roads. Two athletes who had faced enormous expectations. Two athletes who could have treated each other only as rivals. Instead, they became teammates, friends, and supporters. And that might be the real preview. Not necessarily a preview of who will stand on the Olympic podium next time, but a preview of what American figure skating can become when its best athletes realize that they don't have to climb alone. And if Glenn and Liu do decide to chase another Olympic dream, you can be sure that fans will be watching every step of the journey. Because after Milan, their story is no longer simply about competition. It's about what happens when two remarkable careers intersect at exactly the right moment. It's about resilience. It's about trust. It's about friendship. And most importantly, it's about what happens when competitors stop seeing each other as obstacles and start seeing each other as motivation. That is why one warm-up can become a story. That is why one shared rink can create a memory. And that is why the sight of Glenn and Alysa Liu together has fans wondering one thing. Could we really be looking at the beginning of another Olympic chapter? Only time will tell. But if the energy, chemistry, and determination these two showed in Milan are any indication, American women's figure skating has plenty of reasons to be excited about what comes next. And perhaps years from now, fans will look back at that footage and realize that they were watching something special before anyone knew exactly how special it would become. Because sometimes the future doesn't announce itself with a medal. Sometimes it appears quietly, on a sheet of ice, during a 6-minute warm-up, with two skaters moving together. And for Glenn and Alysa Liu, that moment may end up being remembered as one of the clearest symbols of an era in American figure skating that was only beginning to reveal its full potential. The more you look at the relationship between Glenn and Alysa Liu, the more fascinating the story becomes. Because what happened in Milan wasn't simply the result of two talented skaters ending up on the same Olympic team. There was history behind it. There was pressure behind it. And there was a level of mutual understanding that could only come from athletes who had experienced completely different versions of the same demanding sport. For Alysa Liu, the road back to the Olympic stage was never supposed to be simple. She had already experienced what it felt like to become a star before she was old enough to fully understand what that kind of attention could mean. As a teenager, Liu became one of the most recognizable names in American figure skating. She won national titles, competed at the highest international level, and became one of the youngest American women to accomplish major milestones in the sport. But then came the decision that surprised almost everyone. She stepped away. For someone who had reached elite skating so quickly, walking away could have been interpreted as the end of the story. Instead, it became the beginning of a completely different chapter. When Liu eventually returned to competitive skating, she wasn't returning as the same teenager everyone remembered. She was older, more experienced, and seemingly more comfortable with the person behind the skater. That distinction mattered. The Alysa Liu who returned didn't seem interested in proving that she was still the same prodigy. She wanted to discover what kind of skater she could become, and that made her comeback much more powerful. Amber Glenn's story was different. She didn't disappear from the sport. She stayed. She kept competing. She kept chasing the opportunities that sometimes seemed just beyond her reach. And year after year, she experienced the highs and lows that come with trying to establish yourself in an incredibly competitive discipline. There were moments when it looked like Glenn's Olympic dream might remain exactly that, a dream. But she kept going. That persistence eventually paid off. By the time the 2026 Olympic season arrived, Glenn wasn't an outsider hoping for a miracle. She was the reigning U.S. champion and one of the most experienced American women in the field. That meant she and Liu arrived in Milan carrying completely different kinds of expectations. Glenn was expected to lead. Liu was expected to prove that her comeback was real. And then there was Isabel Levito, another young American star with her own remarkable story. Together, they formed an American women's group that was incredibly difficult to predict. And perhaps that's why the friendship between them mattered so much. They weren't identical. They didn't skate the same way. They didn't have the same career path. But they could understand each other. When you're competing at the highest level, sometimes the only person who truly understands what you're experiencing is another athlete who has been there. A coach can understand technique. A family member can understand emotion. A fan can understand excitement. But another skater understands the feeling of standing in the kiss and cry, waiting for a score that could determine your entire season. Another skater understands the silence before a difficult jump. Another skater understands what it feels like to hear the crowd react to a mistake. And another skater understands how difficult it can be to walk back to the locker room after everything you prepared for suddenly doesn't go according to plan. That shared experience can create a bond that fans rarely see. And Glenn and Liu seem to have that kind of bond. That's why the warm-up footage felt so different. It wasn't staged. It wasn't a promotional photo. It was athletes doing what they always do before competition. But because of everything that surrounded the moment, fans saw something bigger. They saw trust. They saw comfort. They saw two athletes who could share the ice without allowing the enormous pressure of the Olympics to change their relationship. And that is not easy. Think about what a 6-minute Olympic warm-up actually means. There are multiple skaters moving simultaneously. Everyone has a planned sequence. Everyone needs space. Everyone is checking their timing. A triple jump requires preparation. A triple axel requires even more. A skater has to know exactly where another athlete is before committing to an element. One wrong move can cause a collision. One moment of hesitation can ruin a jump. That means Olympic warm-ups require awareness and trust. You have to believe the people around you understand the rules of the ice. You have to trust them. And Glenn and Liu appear to have exactly that kind of understanding. But there was another reason their dynamic became so interesting. They were both capable of winning. This wasn't a situation where one athlete was clearly the star and the other was simply supporting her. Both had legitimate podium ambitions. Both had major technical weapons. Both had already proven themselves internationally. That means their friendship existed alongside real competitive tension. And somehow, they managed to keep those two things separate. That may actually be one of the hardest things for an elite athlete to do. Because when you want something badly enough, everyone standing between you and that goal can start feeling like an obstacle. But Glenn and Liu seem to understand that one person's success didn't have to diminish the others. If Liu skated brilliantly, Glenn could appreciate it. If Glenn landed a huge triple axel, Liu could celebrate it. And when one of them struggled, the other could offer support. That isn't weakness. That's maturity. And it may become increasingly important as the sport evolves. Because American women's figure skating is entering a fascinating period. The traditional idea of having one dominant superstar is becoming less important. Instead, the United States has multiple athletes capable of producing major performances. That's healthy for the sport. Competition pushes everyone higher. If one skater improves, the others have to respond. If one athlete adds a more difficult element, the others can't simply stand still. And if a skater develops a new artistic style, the rest of the field has to find new ways to stand out. That creates an environment where everyone becomes better. And Glenn and Liu are perfect examples of that dynamic. Their differences actually make the team stronger. Glenn's aggressive approach can push Liu. Liu's relaxed confidence can inspire Glenn. One can remind the other to attack. The other can remind her teammate to breathe. And when those qualities combine, something special can happen. That's exactly what fans witnessed around the Olympic competition. Even when Glenn experienced the disappointment of the short program, the story wasn't over. She had one more opportunity. And instead of collapsing under the pressure, she produced a remarkable free skate. That comeback says something important about Glenn. She may be one of the most emotionally intense competitors in the American field, but that intensity can become an advantage when she learns how to channel it. After the short program, she could have allowed the mistake to dominate her thoughts. Instead, she returned to the ice and fought. That kind of resilience is difficult to teach. It's built through experience. And Glenn has plenty of it. Every disappointing competition, every missed opportunity, every moment when she wondered whether she would ever reach the Olympics ultimately became part of the preparation for that free skate. And then, standing nearby, was Alysa Liu. Liu's Olympic journey was moving in a different direction. She didn't need a comeback in the free skate. She needed to stay composed. That is a different kind of pressure. When you're already near the top of the standings, the fear isn't always about making a mistake. Sometimes it's about knowing exactly what is at stake. One fall can change everything. One under rotation can cost points. One missed connection can separate gold from silver. Liu somehow managed to keep that pressure from controlling her. Her performance reflected the mindset she had developed during her return to skating. She looked like someone who wanted to be there, not someone who felt obligated to be there. And that difference was enormous. She wasn't simply trying to restore the career she had left behind. She was creating a new version of it. And eventually, that new version became Olympic gold. For American figure skating, that was historic. But for Glenn and Liu, the medal represented something even more personal. Their friendship had survived the most intense competition possible. And that is why their story could continue beyond Milan. Because now they have something few athletes ever get: a shared Olympic memory. Years from now, they won't just remember their own performances. They'll remember the warm-ups, the waiting, the nerves, the jokes, the conversations, the moments when one person was celebrating while another was trying to recover. They'll remember what it felt like to be part of the same American team at the biggest sporting event in the world. Those memories can last much longer than medals, and they could become the foundation of a much longer relationship. Imagine what happens if they continue competing together. They might find themselves at the same Grand Prix events, the same national championships, the same world championships. Maybe they'll once again travel together. Maybe they'll train together. Maybe they'll continue supporting one another through difficult seasons. And perhaps one day, the next generation of American skaters will talk about Glenn and Liu the way today's athletes talk about the legends who came before them. That possibility is what makes their story so exciting. But there is also a fascinating competitive question. Could Glenn and Alysa Liu eventually become direct rivals for the same Olympic spot again? Absolutely. If both remain committed to competing, the next U.S. Olympic selection process could be incredibly intense. There will be younger skaters. There will be returning veterans. There will be new programs. And the selection committee will have to make difficult decisions. But that competition doesn't have to destroy their friendship. In fact, it could make it stronger. Because they already know what it feels like to stand on opposite sides of a ranking. Glenn beat Liu at the 2026 U.S. Championships. Liu later won Olympic gold. Both outcomes tell us something important. The hierarchy in figure skating can change incredibly quickly. One competition can make someone look unbeatable. The next can completely rewrite the narrative. That's why no athlete can afford to become comfortable. And that's also why having someone you trust inside that competitive environment can be such an advantage. You can talk about the pressure with someone who understands. You can laugh about something that outsiders would never understand. You can celebrate without explaining why the achievement matters. And you can recover from disappointment without pretending everything is fine. That's what makes genuine friendships in elite sports so valuable. And perhaps the biggest surprise of the Glenn Liu story is that their friendship feels authentic. There is no need to manufacture drama. The competition is already dramatic enough. There is no need to invent rivalry. The scoreboard already provides that. Instead, the real story is about two athletes who understand that the sport is bigger than one medal. That's refreshing. And it also sends a powerful message to younger athletes. You can be ambitious without being cruel. You can want the spotlight without stepping on someone else. You can celebrate your teammate's success while still chasing your own. And you can lose without becoming bitter. Those lessons may ultimately be more valuable than any technical element. Because careers eventually end, medals eventually become memories. But the relationships athletes build can last much longer. And Glenn and Liu may have built something that survives beyond the Olympic stage. That's why the next Olympic cycle is so intriguing. If they return, fans won't simply watch their skating. They'll watch their relationship. Every shared training session will carry more meaning. Every competition will have another layer. If they are both on the same team again, fans will remember Milan. If they end up competing directly against each other for a major title, fans will remember how they supported each other before. And if one of them struggles, everyone will wonder how the other responds. That's how sports stories evolve. The past becomes part of every future moment. And Milan gave Glenn and Liu a past worth remembering. But there's another important piece of the puzzle. The younger generation is watching. American figure skating doesn't stop with one Olympic cycle. Behind Glenn, Liu, and Levito are younger athletes who are already training harder, developing harder elements, and dreaming about the next games. Those skaters are going to enter a sport shaped by what this generation has accomplished. They will see Glenn's persistence. They will see Liu's comeback. They will see Levito's rise. And they will see something else. They will see that elite skating doesn't have to be a lonely journey. That may be one of the most important legacies these athletes can leave. Not just medals, not just records, but culture. A culture where American skaters support one another. A culture where competition is fierce but respectful. A culture where athletes can celebrate another person's success without feeling threatened. And if that culture continues, the United States could become even stronger internationally. That's the hidden story behind that warm-up. It wasn't only about Glenn and Alysa Liu. It was about what their relationship says about the future of American skating. The sport is changing. The athletes are changing. The expectations are changing. And the way competitors interact with one another is changing too. Fans increasingly want to know the people behind the performances. They want to know what motivates them, what scares them, what makes them laugh, who they trust, who they turn to when things go wrong. And Glenn and Liu have given fans a glimpse into that world. Not through some dramatic announcement, not through a carefully scripted interview, but through ordinary moments that suddenly became meaningful because of the circumstances surrounding them. A warm-up, a smile, a glance, a shared section of ice. That's enough, because sometimes the smallest moments reveal the biggest relationships. And when those moments happen at the Olympics, they become unforgettable. So, could Glenn and Alysa Liu really be warming up together as a preview of another Olympic chapter? It's impossible to know, but the possibility is there. And if both athletes decide to continue their competitive careers, the next 4 years could be fascinating. They will have new goals, new challenges, new rivals, and perhaps another Olympic dream. But regardless of what happens, one thing is already clear. Milan didn't just give us an Olympic champion. It gave us a story about two American skaters who found a way to compete fiercely while still supporting one another. And that may be exactly why fans became so invested in their connection. Because the best sports stories aren't always about who wins. Sometimes they're about who helps you get there. And for Glenn and Alysa Liu, the answer may very well be each other. Their Olympic warm-up wasn't necessarily a prediction, but it was a reminder. The future of American figure skating is not just about jumps, scores, medals, and rankings. It's about people. It's about relationships. It's about resilience. And it's about the athletes who inspire one another to keep going when the pressure becomes overwhelming. If Glenn and Liu continue on this journey, their friendship could become one of the defining stories of the next era. And maybe, years from now, we'll see another Olympic warm-up, another crowded rink, another 6 minutes, another moment where two American stars share the ice. And everyone watching will remember where it all started. In Milan, with two skaters warming up together. Two completely different journeys. One unforgettable Olympic chapter, and a future that still has no final answer. There is a reason moments like this stay with sports fans long after the competition is finished. It isn't always because someone landed a perfect jump. It isn't always because someone won a medal. Sometimes it is because, for just a few seconds, the pressure disappears and you get to see the athletes as people. That is what makes the connection between Glenn and Alysa Liu so fascinating. Their Olympic journeys could not have looked more different, Yet they eventually arrived at the same place, wearing the same colors, representing the same country, and sharing the same ice. And now, after everything that happened in Milan, the question becomes much bigger than what happened during one warm-up. What happens next? Because if there is one thing figure skating has taught fans over and over again, it is that nothing stays exactly the same for very long. The athletes change. The programs change. The scoring evolves. New stars appear. Veterans disappear. And sometimes an athlete who seems finished suddenly returns stronger than ever. Alysa Liu is perhaps the perfect example of that unpredictability. When she stepped away from competitive skating, many people assumed that her most important competitive moments were already behind her. She had achieved so much at such a young age that there was almost nowhere else for the story to go. But she proved that assumption wrong. Her return wasn't simply a comeback. It was a reinvention. She came back with a different perspective, a different maturity, and a different relationship with the sport. That change may have been one of the biggest reasons she was able to handle the pressure of the Olympics so effectively. She wasn't skating because she needed to prove something to everyone else. She was skating because she wanted to. And that distinction can change everything. Amber Glenn's journey offers a completely different lesson. She stayed through the difficult years. She stayed when opportunities didn't always come quickly. She stayed when expectations were high. She stayed when the Olympic dream seemed uncertain. And eventually, she reached the stage she had spent so many years chasing. That makes her Olympic story just as powerful. Glenn didn't arrive in Milan because everything had gone perfectly. She arrived because she refused to stop. And perhaps that is why the friendship between these two athletes works so well. One represents persistence. The other represents rediscovery. One kept moving forward. The other found her way back. And when those paths crossed, something genuinely special happened. They became teammates. They became supporters. And they became part of the same Olympic story. But there is another layer that deserves attention. The two athletes don't simply have different personalities. They also bring different competitive strengths to the ice. Amber Glenn has built much of her identity around power and technical ambition. Her triple axel has become one of the defining elements of her skating. When that jump is working, it changes the entire feeling of her program. It creates momentum. It creates excitement. And it forces the audience to pay attention. Alysa Liu, meanwhile, has developed a reputation for combining technical ability with a sense of freedom and expression that can make her skating look effortless. That contrast is valuable. Because when athletes with different strengths train and compete around one another, they can learn things they wouldn't necessarily learn alone. Glenn can see how Liu manages pressure. Liu can see how Glenn attacks difficult elements. They can observe each other's preparation. They can learn from each other's mistakes. And they can push one another without necessarily becoming enemies. That's one of the most underrated advantages of having strong teammates. Your teammate can become a mirror. They show you what you're doing well. They also show you what you're missing. And sometimes, the biggest improvements come from simply watching another elite athlete approach the same challenge differently. Imagine being Glenn and watching Liu return after stepping away from the sport. That comeback could send a powerful message. You can change. You can take a break. You can discover a different version of yourself and still come back stronger. Now imagine being Liu and watching Glenn continue fighting year after year. That sends a different message. You can keep chasing the dream even when the path becomes frustrating. You can survive disappointment. You can improve with age. You can eventually reach a level that once seemed impossible. Put those two messages together, and you have something powerful. Don't give up, but also don't be afraid to change. That may be the deeper lesson behind their friendship, and it is a lesson that extends far beyond figure skating. But for American skating specifically, their relationship could have another important effect. It could help create a culture where success is shared. For years, fans and media have often focused on rivalries. Who is America's number one? Who deserves the Olympic spot? Who is better? Who has the hardest jumps? Who has the strongest components? Those questions are natural. Competition is part of sports. But the athletes themselves don't necessarily have to live inside that rivalry every second. They can compete fiercely when the music starts and still be friends when the program ends. That balance is healthy. And perhaps the most exciting possibility is that this attitude could influence the next generation. Young skaters watching Glenn and Liu may realize that having a teammate doesn't mean having another person to defeat. It means having another person who understands the journey. Someone who knows what it feels like to train when nobody is watching. Someone who understands the pain of a bad landing. Someone who knows how much courage it takes to step onto the ice after making a mistake. That kind of support can become priceless, especially at the Olympics. Because Olympic pressure is different from anything else. There is no normal competition atmosphere. The entire world seems to be watching. Every camera is searching for a story. Every mistake gets replayed. Every emotional reaction becomes part of the broadcast. And athletes have to perform while knowing that this may be the biggest moment of their lives. Having someone beside you who genuinely understands that pressure can make a difference. For Glenn, that person may be Liu. For Liu, it may be Glenn. And perhaps that is why the warm-up footage became so memorable. It showed that even in the middle of one of the most intense competitions imaginable, there was still room for connection. Now let's imagine the next Olympic cycle. Suppose both athletes continue. The environment will be different. The field will be different. They will be older. They will have more experience. And they will have another Olympic story behind them. That experience could be incredibly valuable. They will know what the Olympic Village feels like. They will know what the rink feels like. They will know how the warm-ups work. They will know how different Olympic pressure feels from an ordinary Grand Prix event. They will know what happens when the cameras turn toward them. And perhaps most importantly, they will know that they survived it once. That confidence can be powerful. For Glenn, another Olympic opportunity could mean another chance to improve on the experience she had in Milan. She could arrive knowing exactly what to expect. Instead of wondering what the Olympic environment will feel like, she would already know. Instead of being overwhelmed by the attention, she could focus on the performance. And instead of allowing one mistake to define her competition, she could use the experience of Milan to recover even faster. For Liu, the challenge could be completely different. After winning Olympic gold, the expectations would become enormous. Suddenly, she wouldn't be the comeback story. She would be the Olympic champion. Everyone would be watching. Every competition would be analyzed. Every score would be compared with her Olympic performance. And that can create an entirely new kind of pressure. But perhaps the person who understands that pressure best would be the teammate who shared the ice with her when it all began. Glenn. That's why their friendship could become even more valuable after the Olympics. The roles may change. The expectations may change. But the understanding remains. And there is something beautiful about that. Because eventually, every athlete realizes that medals aren't the only thing that matters. At the beginning of a career, the goal might be simple. Make the team. Win the title. Get the medal. Reach the Olympics. But after achieving those goals, the questions become different. Did I enjoy the journey? Did I become the person I wanted to be? Did I help anyone else along the way? Did I create memories that matter? And Glenn and Liu have already created some of those memories together. That is what makes their story bigger than a single competition. Their friendship gives fans something to care about even when there isn't a medal on the line. When they appear at a competition together, people notice. When they support one another, people notice. When they share the ice, people notice. Because the audience has already seen the bigger story. They know what each athlete has been through. And they know that the relationship didn't happen because someone decided it would make a good headline. It happened because two athletes spent enough time inside the same demanding world to understand one another. That's genuine. And genuine relationships are what makes sports memorable. Think about the greatest Olympic stories. Years later, people don't always remember the exact scores. They remember the moments. The celebration. The tears. The hug. The comeback. The athlete who stayed after losing to congratulate the winner. The teammate who comforted someone after a mistake. Those are the images that survive. And Glenn and Liu have already given fans that kind of story. So maybe the warm-up wasn't actually a prediction. Maybe it was a symbol. A symbol of a changing generation in American figure skating. A generation that is more open about friendship. A generation that understands mental pressure differently. A generation that doesn't necessarily see competition and friendship as opposites. And that could be incredibly important for the future. Because American skating needs depth. It needs multiple athletes capable of challenging internationally. It needs skaters who can push one another. And it needs an environment where those athletes can grow without constantly being consumed by internal rivalry. Glenn and Liu may be helping demonstrate what that can look like. And there is another reason their story matters. They are proof that careers don't have to follow a straight line. Liu stepped away and came back. Glenn stayed and continued climbing. Both paths worked. There isn't one correct way to become an elite athlete. Sometimes you need persistence. Sometimes you need distance. Sometimes you need a break. Sometimes you need to completely change your relationship with your sport. The important thing is finding the path that allows you to continue growing. That is a message young skaters can take with them. And perhaps that is the real legacy these athletes can leave behind. Not simply how many medals they win, but how they make the next generation feel. If a young skater watches Liu and thinks, maybe I can come back. If another watches Glenn and thinks, maybe I shouldn't give up. If another watches both of them and thinks, I can compete against someone and still respect them, then their impact becomes much bigger than the results page. That's how sports legacies grow. They move from athlete to athlete, from generation to generation. And eventually, the moments that seemed small become the moments everyone remembers. So when fans look back at that Olympic warm-up, perhaps they'll see something different. At first, it was simply Glenn and Alysa Liu sharing the ice. Then it became a viral moment. Then it became a symbol of their friendship. And eventually, it may become a piece of Olympic history. Maybe they will compete together again. Maybe they will stand on another Olympic team. Maybe one will win another medal while the other watches from the boards. Maybe they will become rivals again for a national title. Maybe one day they'll both be coaches, remembering the days when they shared Olympic ice. Nobody knows. And that's the beauty of it. The future is unwritten. The next Olympic cycle hasn't happened. The next U.S. championships haven't been decided. The next generation hasn't revealed itself completely. But the foundation is already there. And that foundation is stronger because these athletes have experienced the highest level of competition together. The most important thing is that they don't need to prove their friendship to anyone. They don't need to make every moment dramatic. They don't need to turn every interaction into a story. The relationship exists because of the shared experience. That's enough. And for fans, it creates a completely different kind of excitement. Instead of asking only, who is going to win? They can ask, how will these athletes continue to grow together? Instead of focusing only on rivalry, they can appreciate development. Instead of treating every competition as a battle, they can see it as another chapter in a much longer story. That is what makes the future so exciting. Because if Glenn and Alysa Liu continue skating, their next chapter will not begin from zero. It will begin with everything they learned in Milan. The pressure, the mistakes, the victories, the friendships, the Olympic memories. And that experience can shape everything that comes afterward. For Glenn, Milan proved that one mistake doesn't have to define an Olympic experience. For Liu, Milan proved that a comeback can lead all the way to the top. For both of them, Milan proved that competition and friendship can exist side by side. And that may be the most powerful takeaway of all. Because when you look at the warm-up again, it becomes almost impossible not to see the symbolism. Two skaters, two journeys, two different personalities, one team, one Olympic dream, and one moment that captured the spirit of an entire generation. Maybe that is why fans are already imagining the possibility of seeing them together at another Olympics. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. But if they do, the story will be even more meaningful. Because fans won't just see two skaters warming up. They'll see everything that came before. They'll remember the comeback. They'll remember the championship. They'll remember the pressure. They'll remember the friendship. And they'll understand exactly how much history exists between those two athletes. That's the magic of sports. A moment that lasts only seconds can carry years of meaning. And Glenn and Alysa Liu have already created one of those moments. The next chapter is still unknown. But if their careers have taught us anything, it is that you should never assume the story is finished. Alysa Liu already proved that once. Glenn has proved it in a different way. Both athletes have rewritten expectations. Both have faced moments that could have ended their momentum. And both found ways to continue. So perhaps the most exciting thing isn't asking whether this was a preview of the next Olympics. Perhaps the better question is, what if it was a preview of something even bigger? What if we're watching the beginning of a long-lasting friendship between two athletes who will continue shaping American skating for years? What if their rivalry becomes legendary precisely because their respect for each other is just as strong? What if the next generation looks back at these two and sees not only champions, but role models? That possibility is far more exciting than any single medal. Because medals sit in cases. Records eventually get broken. Scores eventually disappear into history. But relationships can last. Memories can last, and the influence one athlete has on another can continue long after the music stops. That's what Glenn and Alysa Liu represent. They represent two different ways of reaching the top. They represent resilience. They represent reinvention. They represent the ability to compete without losing humanity. And perhaps most importantly, they represent the idea that you don't have to choose between being ambitious and being supportive. You can want the gold medal. You can want to be the best. You can fight for every point and still look across the ice and genuinely hope the person next to you succeeds. That is what makes their story so special. So the next time you see that footage of Glenn and Alysa Liu warming up together, don't just watch the jumps. Look at the bigger picture. Look at how far both athletes had traveled to get there. Look at the years of work behind every movement. Look at the pressure they were carrying. And then look at how naturally they shared the ice. That is the moment worth remembering. Not because it guarantees another Olympics. Not because it predicts another medal. But because it captures something much more human. Two athletes who could have been defined entirely by competition chose to be defined by connection too. And perhaps that's why this story feels like more than just another skating clip. It feels like the beginning of a legacy. A legacy that may continue through another Olympic cycle. A legacy that may inspire younger skaters. A legacy built not only on medals, but on resilience, friendship, and mutual respect. The future will decide what happens next. Maybe Glenn and Liu will chase another Olympic dream. Maybe their careers will take completely different directions. Maybe one will continue competing while the other moves into another chapter. Whatever happens, Milan will remain a shared memory. The rink, the lights, the pressure, the warm-ups, the performances, the celebrations, and those moments when two American stars could simply be themselves. That is what fans will remember. And if one day they do meet again on another Olympic ice surface, surrounded by another generation of competitors, another crowd, and another impossible amount of pressure, everyone will know the history behind that moment. They'll remember where it started. They'll remember the two skaters warming up together. And they'll understand why it mattered. Because sometimes the future doesn't arrive with a dramatic announcement. Sometimes it starts quietly, with a simple warm-up, with two athletes sharing the ice, with a friendship that nobody knows will become important until years later. And maybe that's exactly what Glenn and Alysa Liu gave us. A glimpse, a possibility, a reminder that the greatest Olympic stories aren't always about the athletes who stand on the podium. Sometimes they're about the people who stand beside them. And if these two continue their journeys, there may be many more chapters left to write. The next Olympics may be years away. The next generation may already be training somewhere far from the spotlight. And the future of American figure skating may look completely different by the time those games arrive. But one thing is certain. The story of Glenn and Alysa Liu has already become one worth remembering. Two athletes, two extraordinary journeys, one unforgettable Olympic experience. And perhaps, just perhaps, one more Olympic chapter waiting somewhere ahead. Only time will tell. But until then, fans can look back at that warm-up and appreciate what it really represented. Not a guarantee, not a prediction, but a moment of possibility. And sometimes, in sports, possibility is where the greatest stories begin.